Shabbat Shalom. Someone asked me earlier this week, they said, how could Torah be relevant this year? It's a silly question to ask a rabbi. But they asked because it seems like the world is so serious, there's so much going on. How could we pour our thoughts and minds into a book thousands of years old? How could it possibly know what we're going through? I have to say that I can understand the question, and there are certainly times where it seems the Torah, the stories that we read, are perhaps not the stories we need to hear in any given moment. Perhaps talking about animals this week doesn't seem to fit a world that's facing tragic loss and destruction, and we saw news in Afghanistan again, and continue to focus on COVID. It certainly didn't know of those things. And yet, it seems to me, over these last 2 years, that the stories in the Torah have never been as ripe with meaning, because our lives have changed so much. We can see so much more, and we hear so much more from each other as to what is actually there. And so I want to share some Torah with us tonight, and then I want to talk a little bit, as some of us already have today, about Marty Newman, of blessed memory now, a wonderful congregant who was so active here, who we laid to rest earlier today. The story of the Tower of Babel is short, but it's rich. Here it is. You're going to hear it 3 times, by the way, so get ready. Get comfortable in your seats. We'll be here for an hour and a half. And it's going to take you turning on your memory a little bit. So if your memory is less than 45 seconds, we need to strengthen it a bit for right now. So here's how the story goes according to the Torah. Everyone on earth had the same language, it says. They migrated from the east, and they came to a valley, and they said to one another, "Let's make bricks and build us a city with a tower and its top all the way into the sky so that we can make a name for ourselves. Else we shall be scattered all over the world." But God came down to look at the city and the tower that humans had built, and God said, "If, as one people with one language, this is how they begin to act, then nothing that they may propose to do will be out of their reach. So I will therefore confuse their speech so that they shall not understand one another." Therefore God scattered them from that place over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city, which is why it is called Bavel, because there God confounded them, the meaning of the word Bavel, and confounded the speech of the whole earth. From there God scattered them over the face of the whole earth. So certainly we read this story and we say, well, this is an explanation of why we all speak different languages, of why we all live in different places. There had to be a way to explain in the Torah, just chapters after Adam and Eve, how Adam and Eve came to be a family that spoke hundreds of languages, looked different, lived in different places. And so this is our explanation. But as scholars have studied it, they've shared that it's a much deeper passage. It's not actually, to some at least, an explanation of how we came about to have different languages or how we came about to be spread across the earth. But in one explanation, they say this is a story about the powerless, a group of people ruled by another, writing a brilliant short story to criticize those who rule over them without naming them. They use indirection to implicate those who rule over their lives because they themselves have no power. They use the power of storytelling. Because in ancient Israel, the powerful empire of the time was Mesopotamia 3,000 years ago, and Israel, shockingly, I know, was just a small religious minority. And so, rewritten today, here's what the Tower of Babel might sound like. Everyone in Washington had the same language. As they moved from their fancy universities to the decorated halls of Congress, they said to one another, "Come, let's build a country for people like us so that we never have to leave this place." But God came down to look at what the politicians had built. And God said, "If you are so narrow-minded to only discuss that which benefits you, then you will never build the world as it should be. So I will confuse your speech so that you have to rely on those outside of Congress in order to build anything." So the people from Washington were scattered across the country, and they had to rely on those they could understand. Perhaps one day. But there's another example, an understanding of the story. Perhaps it's not about a small minority religious group trying to fight against the Mesopotamians. Perhaps the meaning of the Tower of Babel was more about a fight that we have internally with ourselves. Because all people, all of us, have a tendency to want to overreach. Each of us only hears our own words and knows our own experience. And so, in this version, we might say, "I only know myself and no one else. I have my own language. No one understands me. So I am going to build a beautiful palace and make a name for myself so that everyone knows who I am. That way I'll never be alone. People will flock to me, and I won't be misunderstood anymore." But then God came down to look at what I was doing, and God worried. "You will not find companionship by building great palaces," God said. "You will not attract people to you by making yourself more visible. People may look at the building you've constructed, but they will do so from afar. They will not love you for the palaces. They will love you for the spaces you share. You human beings are capable of building great things. Don't do it at the expense of nurturing great relationships. Therefore, I will confuse your mind so that you no longer try to build bigger houses and you focus on building better relationships." Thus, God stopped us from building something for the sake of me and forced me to build something for the sake of others. The problem of the Tower of Babel was not a problem of language. In both of these opinions, it was the problem of ambition. If our eyes are only set on how much we want to accomplish, on capacity, then we miss whether what we want is good for us, perhaps whether it's good for others or not. How often do we pursue something simply because we can? How often do our leaders in government, in our companies, in our synagogues, pursue something because it's before us, but never ask, should we? The Torah is not concerned with whether we are capable or not. It's concerned with our purpose. Is what we are doing the right thing to do? Not, is what we are doing what we can do? There's a story told of Elijah the prophet who was supposed to announce the day in which the Messianic era will begin. Throughout tradition, it's often been referred to as a Messiah, a particular person. And so the students of Elijah are said to go up to him and say, "Well, Elijah, how will we know? Who will this student be? Will it be the best builder in the community that will be the Messiah? Will it be the smartest student, the one who knows the most Torah? Will it be the person who's helped the most people? Or will it be the son of a king, someone who came from royalty?" Elijah pointed across the room and said, "You want to know who will inherit the world to come, who will bring about the greatest days? It will be the merrymakers, those who help people find joy. We talked about Marty Newman earlier today, as I mentioned, as we laid her to rest. And as I mentioned, one of my favorite images of Marty, one that I never saw with my own eyes, but that was certainly one of her great legacies, was that Marty created and led the mitzvah clown program. The Torah, or the rabbis, they didn't necessarily know the word clown, but I think merrymakers is a pretty good translation. So who will bring about the best of days? The clowns. The ones who make people happy, who bring people together. Hopefully not the ones who scare the little kids. And so Marty, so often, for us, for all who knew her, which was many in our congregation, she was there connecting people to each other, not building towers, not putting her name on things and asking people to look at her, even though that is what clowns do by definition. But in fact, clowns hide their face. You don't know who they are, and yet they bring us joy. Merrymakers. This, I think, is what I hope God had in mind when God came down to see the Tower of Babel and saw that the people were obsessed with building something higher and bigger and taller so that the world would look at them as having achieved something instead of walking the streets, talking with each other, being a part of a community, being a mitzvah clown who visits hospitals, who teaches Sunday school. So I imagine the result of tearing down the Tower of Babel, whether it was really there or not, was that we learned to be more like Marty Newmans, to connect with each other, to cherish the spaces we create, not to make them taller and bigger, not to brag, not to try to be more ambitious, but rather to have a purpose. And so we pray that she will be remembered well as we miss her, but so too, our legacy, her legacy is that we don't build things bigger and higher, but rather let's build them better and make this a place that she would be proud to continue to be her legacy. May her memory be a blessing. So too, may we be humbled by the stories in our Torah this week and every week, and may we continue to be a people willing to talk to all of those who speak our language and don't, to come together, to find ways to focus on our purpose and not necessarily on our ambitions. Shabbat Shalom. Continue page 282 as we'll rise for Aleinu.